In the sun-scorched badlands of New Mexico territory, 6 armed men are about to make the deadliest mistake of their lives. When they spot the lone traveler on a dusty mare, they see nothing but an easy target, another forgotten drifter carrying his life savings in threadbare saddlebags. They couldn't be more wrong. The quiet man in the worn duster is James Deadeye McGrath, the most feared gunslinger who ever rode the frontier. For 15 years, he enforced justice across the territories, with a reputation built on lightning-fast draws and shots that seemed to defy the laws of nature. His name alone once made hardened killers turn and run. This is not just another tale of frontier justice. This is the story of how the most notorious gang in the territory learned that legends don't fade. They just get hungry for vengeance. When they stole his prized possession, they didn't realize they were waking a demon that had been sleeping for 5 long years. What follows is the story of how one aging legend would dismantle an entire gang of killers, using nothing but a worn 6-shooter, decades of experience, and the skills that made him a nightmare for outlaws to whisper about. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across McGrath's weathered face as he guided his mare along the dusty trail. His appearance was unremarkable by design: graying beard flecked with trail dust, worn leather duster that had seen better days, and eyes that seemed more interested in the ground than his surroundings. To most observers, he looked like any other aging drifter trying to survive in the unforgiving territory. The 6 men watching from the ridge made that same mistake, passing around a spyglass and grinning at what they saw. Their leader, Jake "Snake" Eyes Wilson, noted the way the old man's shoulders slumped, how his gun belt seemed more habit than threat. "Boys," he whispered, "Christmas came early." What they didn't notice were the subtle details that would have sent them running. The way McGrath's eyes constantly scanned the terrain while appearing unfocused. How his right hand rested just slightly away from his body, closer to his holster than any regular traveler would find comfortable. The precision with which he guided his horse around loose rocks that might affect his footing. In his saddlebags, wrapped carefully in oiled cloth, lay the only possession that truly mattered to him. A reminder of why he'd hung up his guns 5 years ago. The same guns that had made him a legend from Texas to the Dakota Territory. The same guns that had ended the notorious Clayton gang in what folks still called the 20-second massacre, though it had actually taken 18 seconds by McGrath's. Count Sarah's final letter. He'd read it so many times the paper was wearing thin at the creases, but he still checked it every morning and night. His wife's last words, written as she lay dying from the fever that no amount of fast draws or deadly accuracy could fight. The letter that had made him put away his guns and seek a quieter life. The gang watching him had no way of knowing about the letter, no way of knowing that the simple piece of paper they'd soon dismiss as worthless was the only thing keeping the most dangerous gunslinger in the territory from returning to his old ways. No way of knowing that stealing it would awaken something that had been dormant but never truly gone. McGrath shifted in his saddle, easing the stiffness in his right shoulder. An old injury from a shootout in Dodge City that had left 7 men dead before they could clear leather. The motion was smooth, practiced, maintaining the illusion of an old man's discomfort while actually settling his coat for easier access to his Colt. A crow called out from somewhere ahead, and McGrath's mare flicked her ears forward. He'd chosen this trail deliberately, reading the signs of regular travel that suggested it was a favorite route for locals. The kind of route that bandits might watch. The kind of route where 6 armed men might think an old drifter made easy prey. The sun climbed higher as he rode, baking the desert hardpan and creating heat shimmer that would play tricks with most men's aim. McGrath had learned long ago how to adjust for it, just like he'd learned to use the sun's position to his advantage in countless gunfights. Old habits died hard, even after 5 years of trying to forget them. A pebble clattered down the ridge to his right, a sound so faint most would have missed it. McGrath noted the position without turning his head. Another small stone followed, and from the left, and he fought back a grim smile. They were moving into position, thinking themselves clever as they set up their ambush. Amateurs. In his prime, he'd have already drawn and put 6 men down before they knew what happened. But he wasn't that man anymore. Sarah's letter had changed everything. So he kept riding, maintaining his facade of ignorance, playing the part of an easy target. Maybe they'd be smart. Maybe they'd see something in his bearing that warned them away. Maybe they'd let him pass and live to see another sunset. The sound of hammers cocking told him they weren't that smart. The town of Devil's Fork lay 3 days behind McGrath, nothing more than a collection of sun-bleached buildings clinging to existence in the harsh territory. He'd stopped there just long enough to water his horse and hear the whispers, tales, of the Wilson gang's latest brutality. 3 homesteaders killed, a stagecoach robbed, a ranch burned to the ground. The law couldn't touch them, locals said. Nobody could. Time was hearing such stories would have set McGrath's boots pointing toward trouble. Back then, his reputation alone had been enough to make men choose better paths. Dead eyes coming. 3 words that could empty a town of troublemakers faster than a prairie fire. But those days were dust now, scattered like ashes across a territory that grew more lawless with each passing season. The desert stretched before him, a vast emptiness broken only by twisted Joshua trees and rock formations that seemed to mock human ambition. McGrath had seen good men try to tame this land, watched them break themselves against its indifference. The territory didn't care about justice or reputation. Out here, a man was only as good as his next decision, his next draw, his next breath. A vulture wheeled overhead, casting its shadow across McGrath's path. 5 years ago, he'd have taken it as an omen. Now he just noted how the bird's pattern suggested it was following something, or someone, on the ridgeline to his left. Another sign his observers weren't as clever as they thought. The air grew, thicker with tension, like the moments before a storm. McGrath had felt this weight countless times before, in saloons and dusty streets across the frontier. The pressure that built before violence erupted, before men who thought themselves wolves discovered they'd cornered something far more dangerous. His mare sensed it too, her ears flicking back and forth, muscles tensing beneath the saddle. He'd chosen her for her steadiness under fire, a trait he'd hoped never to need again. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice carrying the same calm it had when facing down the Carson brothers in that bloody afternoon in Tombstone. The rocky terrain narrowed ahead, forcing the trail between 2 steep walls of sun-baked stone, a perfect spot for an ambush. Any experienced traveler would find another way around, but McGrath rode on, playing his part. The worn holster at his hip held more than just a gun. It carried the weight of hundreds of decisions, countless moments when the space between life and death had been measured in fractions of seconds. Snake Eyes, Wilson's gang, had been growing bolder, pushing deeper into settled territory. The law couldn't stop them, wouldn't stop them. In Devil's Fork, McGrath had heard a young widow's story of how they'd burned her farm, killed her husband, laughing as they rode away. The old McGrath would have hunted them to the ends of the earth for such a crime. But Sarah's letter lay in his saddlebags, her final wishes a constant reminder of the peace she'd wanted for him. "There's been enough violence," she'd written, "enough death. Promise me you'll find another way to live." He'd promised. For 5 years he'd kept that promise, walked away from fights, ignored injustice, let his legend fade into whispers and campfire tales. Now, as he rode into the perfect killing ground, he felt the weight of that promise pressing against him like the desert heat. The gang's positions were obvious to his experienced eye. 2 men high on each wall of the narrow pass, 2 more ahead behind a cluster of boulders. Amateur work, but effective enough against most travelers. They'd done this before, grown comfortable with their tactics, gotten sloppy. McGrath's right hand remained relaxed, close to his holster, but not suspiciously so. The same hand that could draw, aim, and fire faster than most men could blink. The hand that had earned him his reputation, one trigger pull at a time. 5 years of peace hadn't slowed his reflexes. He practiced every dawn and dusk, alone in the desert, keeping his skills sharp while praying he'd never need them again. The shadows in the pass grew longer as the sun climbed higher. Someone shifted, position above, sending another small cascade of pebbles down the rocky slope. McGrath counted footsteps, measured distances, calculated angles, all unconsciously, his mind working through the geometry of violence even as he maintained his facade of ignorance. A hot wind gusted through the pass, carrying the scent of sage. And gunpowder. They were ready. He was ready. The only question remaining was whether they would be wise enough to let him pass in peace or foolish enough to shatter 5 years of hard-won tranquility. The answer came with the sound of boots on stone and the metallic click of a hammer being cocked. In the crowded saloon of Devil's Fork, just 3 days before the ambush, conversations had hushed when old Bill Hawkins started talking about Deadeye McGrath. The aging bartender had seen the quiet drifter pass through earlier that day, though, like most, he hadn't recognized the legend beneath the trail dust. Folks nowadays, Bill had said, wiping a glass with a dirty rag. They don't remember what it was like when McGrath rode these territories. Way I heard it, he once faced down 15 men in Silver Creek. 15, story goes, they had him surrounded, thought they'd finally caught the famous Deadeye sleeping. The Wilson gang's youngest member, Tommy Quick Draw Wilson, had been in the crowd that night listening with the rest. What happened to them? He'd asked, not knowing that in 3 days he'd be pointing a gun at the very man from the story. Found all 15 the next morning, Bill answered. Laid out neat, as you please, in front of the sheriff's office. Not a single wasted bullet, 1 shot per man, right between the eyes. Sheriff said it couldn't have taken more than 10 seconds. Another patron, a grizzled miner, had spoken up then. That ain't nothing. I was in Dodge when McGrath took on the Clayton boys, 7 of the meanest killers you ever saw. They called him out right there on Front Street. Sun was in his eyes. Wind was blowing something fierce. Wouldn't have given a wooden nickel for his chances. The saloon had grown quieter still, even the piano player pausing to listen. Way I saw it, the miner continued. McGrath's hands never seemed to move, just this blur like heat shimmer on the desert. When it was over, 7 men lay dead, and McGrath was just standing there, calm as Sunday morning, smoke still curling from his gun, but his eyes, Lord, those eyes, like staring into forever. Tommy Wilson had scoffed then, young and full of his own reputation. Sounds like tall tales to me. Probably just some regular gunslinger who got lucky a few times. Besides, everyone knows Deadeye McGrath disappeared years ago, probably dead in a ditch somewhere. Bill had just shaken his head. Son, you better pray you never find out how wrong you are. McGrath wasn't just fast. He was something else entirely. They say he could shoot a playing card edge-on at 50 paces, could draw and fire so quick that folks swore he never touched his gun at all. But it wasn't just the speed that made him legendary. What was it then? Tommy had asked, unable to hide his curiosity. It was his eyes. The way he looked at you, like he was seeing every move you'd make before you made it, like he was counting your heartbeats and choosing which one would be your last. Men who survived facing him, and there weren't many, said it was like being judged by death itself. An old woman by the fire had spoken up then, her voice carrying the weight of personal memory. I saw him once, back when the Rogers gang was terrorizing these parts. They'd killed my brother, thought nobody could touch them. McGrath rode into town one morning, didn't say more than 2 words to anyone. By sunset, 8 outlaws were dead, and my brother's pocket watch was sitting on my doorstep, Never saw him leave, never got to thank him. Just disappeared like a ghost. What happened to him? Someone had asked. Why'd he stop? Bill had set down his glass, choosing his words carefully. Some say he found love, tried to leave the violence behind. Others reckon the weight of all. Those souls he sent to judgment finally caught up with him. But I'll tell you this, men like McGrath, they don't just fade away. That kind of skill, that kind of purpose, it stays with you. The miner had nodded solemnly. Heard tell he made, a promise to someone, a dying wish that made him hang up his guns. But promises like that, they can be broken, and God help anyone who gives him reason to break it. These stories echoed now through the narrow pass as McGrath rode deeper into the ambush. None of the men preparing to rob him had made the connection between the legendary Deadeye and the dusty traveler before them. They were about to learn the hard way that legends don't die, they just get patient. Snake Eyes. Wilson stepped out from behind the rocks, revolver trained on McGrath's chest. His confidence showed in every movement, the lazy swagger, the slight smirk, the casual way he rested his finger on the trigger. Behind him, the rest of the gang emerged from their positions, weapons drawn. Well now, old-timer, Snake Eyes drawled, looks like you took a wrong turn. This here's a toll road, and the price just went up to everything you got. McGrath sat motionless in his saddle, hands raised slightly. His eyes, still downcast, noted every detail. The distance to each man, the angle of their guns, the subtle signs of inexperience in their stances. Only Snake Eyes showed any real competence, but even he had positioned himself too close. Amateur's mistake. Not carrying much, McGrath said softly, his voice rough from disuse. Barely enough to feed myself and the horse. Tommy Wilson, eager to prove himself, circled around on McGrath's left side. Let's see what's in them saddlebags, old man. Nice and slow now. McGrath's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly. 5 years of peace, warred with decades of instinct. He could end this in seconds, 6 shots, 6 bodies hitting the ground before the echo of the first round faded. But Sarah's words whispered in his mind, "Promise me you'll find another way." "Take what you want," McGrath said, keeping his voice. Tired and defeated. "Just leave me water enough to reach the next town." Snake Eyes gestured to his men. "Check him for weapons, then the bags." 2 bandits approached, 1 from each side. The first roughly pulled McGrath's gun from its holster, whistling appreciatively at the well-maintained Colt. "Nice piece for a drifter," he said, tucking it into his own belt. If he noticed how perfectly balanced it was, how the grip showed, signs of expert care rather than just age, he gave no sign. The second bandit reached for the saddlebags, yanking them open with callous disregard. He dumped the contents onto the dusty ground, some dried beef, a canteen, spare ammunition, and a carefully wrapped bundle secured with leather ties. "What's this, then?" Snake Eyes moved forward, curious despite himself. He picked up the bundle, fingers working at the knots. "Awful careful wrapping for a drifter's goods." "Please," McGrath said, and for the first time there was something other than weariness in his voice. Something that made Snake Eyes pause for just a moment. "That has no value to you. Just personal papers." The bundle came open, revealing Sarah's letter. Snake Eyes scanned it briefly, his smirk widening. "Love letter from some dead woman. You're right, old man. No value at all." He crumpled the paper, tossing it aside where it landed in the dust. McGrath's hands lowered slowly to his. Saddle horn. To the bandits, it probably looked like the gesture of a defeated man accepting his loss. They didn't notice how his knuckles whitened, how the leather of his gloves creaked under the pressure of his grip. "You look thirsty, boys," Snake Eyes said, addressing his gang while keeping his gun trained on McGrath. "Let's see what else the old-timer's carrying. Check his coat." As rough hands pulled at his duster, McGrath's eyes finally lifted. For just a moment they met Snake Eye's gaze, and something in them made the gang leader take an involuntary step back. It was like staring into the eyes of a coiled rattlesnake, cold, deadly, and promising violence with absolute certainty. But the moment passed quickly, and Snake Eyes convinced himself he'd imagined it. The old man was just another victim, another easy mark in a territory full of them. They took everything of apparent value, his gun, his supplies, even his spare boots. The letter lay forgotten in the dust, its edges curling in the hot wind. "Ride. An old-timer," Snake Eyes commanded, gesturing with his gun. "And count yourself lucky we're feeling generous today. Could have been a lot worse for you." McGrath turned his horse slowly, every movement measured and controlled. "You're right," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence of the pass. "It could have been worse." He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Still could." Something in his tone made Tommy Wilson raise his gun nervously, but Snake Eyes just laughed. "Move on, before we change our minds about letting you keep that horse." They watched him ride away, congratulating themselves on an easy score. None of them noticed how he bent down smoothly from his saddle to retrieve the crumpled letter as he passed it, tucking it carefully into his shirt pocket. None of them recognized the fluid grace of the movement, the kind that only comes from countless hours of practice. "Did you see his face?" Tommy laughed, holstering his gun. "Like a whipped
dog!"
Snake Eyes nodded, but something nagged at the back of his mind. Something about the way the old man had moved, the way he had spoken at the end. He shrugged it off. They were the Wilson gang, the terror of 3 territories. What did they have to fear from one broken-down drifter? "Let's head back to camp," he ordered. "We'll celebrate our good fortune tonight." As they mounted up, none of them thought to look back. If they had, they might have seen McGrath stopped at the top of the rise, watching them with eyes that had gone as cold and deadly as a winter storm. The same eyes that had been the last thing hundreds of men had seen before meeting their maker. Sarah's letter rested against his heart, wrinkled but intact. 5 years of peace. 5 years of keeping his promise, 5 years of trying to be something other than what he was, all undone by one bad decision made by men too foolish to recognize death. When it sat before them, as twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and crimson, McGrath made camp. To any observer, he might have appeared to be just another traveler settling in for the night. But there was nothing random about his chosen location. From this vantage point, he could see the distant flicker of the Wilson gang's campfire. They hadn't bothered to conceal it. Why should they? They were the predators in this territory, not the prey. Not yet. McGrath removed Sarah's letter from his shirt pocket, carefully smoothing the crumpled paper. In the dying light, he traced her words with weathered fingers. "Promise me you'll find another way to live," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Some promises cost too much to keep." He reached into his boot, removing a hidden derringer, the one weapon the gang hadn't found. It wasn't his preferred gun, but it would do for what came next. 5 years of peace had ended the moment Snake Eyes Wilson had thrown that letter in the dust. Before dawn, McGrath was moving. He read the gang's trail like other men read books, the depth of hoofprints telling him which horses carried extra weight, the pattern of cigarette butts showing their watch rotations, the carelessly discarded beef jerky wrapper revealing the direction of the wind when they made camp. By mid-morning, he'd closed half the distance between them. The gang had sent their youngest member, Tommy, to resupply at a small trading post. They didn't expect anyone to be following them, certainly. Not the broken-down drifter they'd robbed. Another mistake. McGrath reached the trading post an hour after Tommy left. The young outlaw had bragged while buying supplies, telling the storekeepers how they'd robbed some pathetic old-timer. He'd even shown off McGrath's Colt, claiming he'd won it in a fair fight. "Ain't never seen a gun so well maintained," the storekeeper told McGrath. not recognizing him as the robbery victim. That Wilson boy was mighty proud of it. Shame, though. What's that? McGrath asked quietly. Way he was wearing it, all wrong for that holster. Gun like that, custom fitted to its owner. It's like wearing another man's boots. Never quite. It's right. McGrath bought minimal supplies, paying with coins hidden in his horse's saddle. As he turned to leave, the storekeeper called out, Might want to avoid the North Trail. Wilson gang's been working that area. Mean bunch of snakes. They are? Appreciate the warning, McGrath replied. Then, almost to himself, snakes don't worry me much. Not when you know where to cut off their heads. He caught up with Tommy Wilson 3 miles outside the trading post. The young outlaw had stopped to rest his horse, confident in his safety. The first warning he had was the sound of a hammer being cocked. That's a fine gun you're wearing, McGrath's voice came from behind him. Bit too fine for a boy who doesn't know how to treat it right. Tommy spun, reaching for the stolen Colt. He was fast, probably the fastest draw in the Wilson gang, but as his fingers touched the grip, he finally saw what others had written about in countless saloons across the territory. He saw Deadeye. McGrath's eyes. You're him, Tommy whispered, hand freezing on the gun. Smart boy, McGrath said softly. Now, you've got 2 choices. You can try to draw that gun. See if all those hours of practice can match 20 years of experience. Or you can start talking. Tell me everything about your gang's hideout, their patterns, their weaknesses. Tommy's hand trembled on the gun. Snake Eyes will kill me if I talk. Son. McGrath's voice carried the weight of countless gunfights. You need to worry about who's going to kill you right now. The young outlaw swallowed hard, looking into those legendary eyes. Then slowly he moved his hand away from the gun. What do you want to know? As the sun climbed higher, Tommy Wilson learned why Deadeye McGrath was more than just another gunslinger. The old man's questions were precise, tactical, the kind that revealed he'd done this countless times before. He asked about guard rotations, escape routes, hiding spots for extra ammunition, things Tommy hadn't even thought to notice. When the questioning was done, McGrath retrieved his Colt, checking it over with practiced care. You've got a choice now, boy. Ride south, leave the territory, find honest work, or stay and be in the ground before sunset tomorrow. You're letting me go? Sarah would have wanted it that way, McGrath said, more to himself than Tommy. But make no mistake, if I see you again, there won't be any talking. As Tommy rode south, pushing his horse hard, McGrath watched him go. The boy had made the right choice. The same couldn't be said for the rest of the Wilson gang. He checked his recovered Colt one final time, feeling the familiar weight that had been missing these past 5 years. By sunset, the Wilson gang would learn why mothers used to frighten their children with stories of Deadeye McGrath. The Wilson gang's camp sprawled across a hidden canyon, exactly where Tommy said it would be. McGrath observed from a high ridge, noting each detail with cold precision. 5 men remained, Snake Eyes and his most trusted killers. They'd spread their bedrolls around 3 separate campfires, a standard practice for outlaws who didn't completely trust each other. What they'd created, thinking it made them safer, had actually given McGrath exactly what he needed: isolated targets. He'd spent the afternoon preparing, using skills that hadn't dulled with time. First he'd scattered caltrops on the 2 escape trails leading from the canyon, not enough to be noticed, but sufficient to lame any horse trying to flee at speed. Then he'd moved their spare ammunition, hidden in a cave just as Tommy had described. Didn't take it, just moved it 50 yards west. Small changes that would become fatal when pressure mounted. Used to do this different, McGrath muttered to himself, checking his recovered Colt one final time. Used to just walk in, call them out, clean, quick, done. But 5 years of peace had taught him patience, and Sarah's influence still tempered his methods. This wouldn't be quick, but it would be thorough. The sun was setting when Hank Wilson, no relation to Snake Eyes but proud to share the name, rode out to take his turn at watch duty. He never made it to his post. McGrath's first shot took his horse's front leg out from under it, sending both mount and rider tumbling. The second shot knocked Hank's gun away before he could clear leather. "Evening," McGrath said, stepping from the shadows. "Remember me?" Recognition dawned in Hank's eyes, followed quickly by fear. You're that old-timer from the pass. Listen, mister, we was just having some fun. No harm meant. That letter you all found so worthless." McGrath's voice remained conversational, even as his eyes grew colder. "Tell me about Snake Eyes, his habits, his weaknesses." "I ain't talking," Hank spat, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Wilson gang don't turn on each other." McGrath's draw was so fast, Hank didn't even see it happen. Suddenly the Colt was in his hand, and a bullet had parted Hank's hair so close it left a burning line across his scalp. "That's the interesting thing about loyalty," McGrath said, gun unwavering. "It only works when the man commanding it is alive to enforce it. Next shot goes about 6 inches lower. Your choice." Hank talked, just like Tommy had talked, just like men had always talked. When faced with those eyes and that gun, he revealed everything. How Snake Eyes slept with his back to a rock wall, how he kept a shotgun within arm's reach, how he never ate or drank anything he hadn't watched being prepared. "You're gonna kill me anyway," Hank finally said, voice trembling. "Might as well get it over with." McGrath considered him for a long moment. "Sarah would say different," he said finally. "Head west. Don't stop until you hit California. I see you again. We won't have this conversation." As Hank stumbled away into the gathering darkness, McGrath turned his attention back to the camp. 4 men remained. 4 men who had handled Sarah's last letter with contempt, who had mocked the words that had kept him peaceful for 5 years. He moved like a shadow through the rocks, positioning himself where he could observe the main camp. Snake Eyes was holding court by the largest fire, bragging about their easy score. McGrath's gun felt alive in his hand, demanding justice, but he pushed the urge down. Sarah had taught him that vengeance served cold was vengeance served best. The night deepened, and McGrath became one with the darkness. He was no longer the peaceful drifter of the past 5 years. He was what he had always been, a force of nature wrapped in human form, a legend that walked in boots and carried judgment in a well-worn holster. The Wilson gang had stolen more than just a letter. They'd stolen his peace, his promise, his attempt at redemption. Now they would learn why mothers in 3 territories still whispered his name to frighten misbehaving children. Deadeye McGrath was hunting again. The whispers started in Dead Rock's only saloon, when Tommy Wilson rode through like the devil himself was on his heels. The young gunslinger, who'd always been quick to boast about his connection to the Wilson gang, didn't stop for a drink. Didn't even slow down. Just thundered through town heading south, his face white as a desert bone. Bill Hawkins, the old bartender who'd told tales of Deadeye McGrath just days before, noticed something peculiar about the gun Tommy was wearing. "Wasn't his usual piece," he told the gathered crowd that evening. "Looked like that custom Colt the old drifter was carrying." By noon the next day, Hank Wilson staggered into the trading post where McGrath had found him. He didn't say much, just bought supplies with shaking hands. But someone noticed the burn across his scalp, a wound that could only have come from a bullet passing close enough to part his hair. Never seen Hank scared before, the storekeeper's wife whispered too. Her customers. Man's hands were shaking so bad he could barely count his coins, kept looking over his shoulder like he expected death itself to walk through the door. Word spread through the territory's underground telegraph, the whispered conversations in saloons, the quiet exchanges between traders, the stories shared around campfires. Something was hunting the Wilson gang, something that moved like a shadow and shot with supernatural accuracy. At the Golden Spur Saloon, an old-timer squinted at his drink and shared a memory. Saw something like this before, back in '69. Deadeye. McGrath was hunting the Clayton boys. Didn't just kill them, he haunted them first. Picked them apart one by one, each shot more impossible than the last. In the sheriff's office, reports started piling up. 3 separate witnesses claimed they'd seen a lone rider moving through Wilson gang territory. Each description was different. Some said he was young, others old, tall or short. But they all mentioned his eyes, cold eyes, dead eyes, eyes that had seen too much and promised more. Found 2 of Snake Eye's men at the crossroads, a stage driver reported. Alive, but they'd thrown away their guns and were running east fast as their horses could carry them. Never seen hard men that scared before. The local newspaper editor pieced together the patterns. Wilson gangs falling apart. 4 men seen. Fleeing the territory in 2 days. No bodies found, no shots reported in town. It's like they're being picked off by a ghost. In Deadrock's telegraph office, an urgent message arrived from the territorial marshal. Reports of Deadeye McGrath, cited, stop. Considered extremely dangerous, stop, avoid engagement, stop, wait for reinforcements, stop. The telegraph operator, who'd lived through McGrath's active years, didn't bother sending a reply. He knew from experience that by the time reinforcements arrived, there would be nothing left to engage. At the Lucky Strike Saloon, a cattle driver fresh from the trail shared what he'd seen. Came across a campsite in Wilson territory. Fire still. Warm, coffee still in the pot. But they'd left everything behind, food, ammunition, even money, like they'd seen something that scared them worse than starving. An old buffalo hunter, his face weathered as the territory itself, nodded knowingly. Ain't natural way they're running. Reminds me of how wolves scatter when they smell a grizzly. Something bigger and meaner's moved into their hunting grounds. As the sun set on the 3rd day since the robbery, Snake Eyes Wilson's inner circle had been reduced to just 4 men, not by violence, not by law, but by fear. Fear of a legend they'd awakened. Fear of a man whose reputation had once emptied towns faster than a cholera outbreak. In his hidden canyon camp, Snake Eyes raged at his dwindling crew. Cowards and traitors, all of them, running from shadows and campfire stories. But even he couldn't ignore the signs. The moved ammunition cache, the disabled escape routes. The way every man who encountered the mysterious hunter came back changed, if they came back at all. It's like he's everywhere, one of Snake Eyes' remaining men whispered. Eyes watching from every shadow, like he knows what we're going to do before we do it. In the gathering darkness, those who knew the old stories began locking their doors and avoiding the streets after sunset. Not out of fear of Deadeye McGrath, he'd never harmed an innocent, but out of respect for what was coming. They'd seen his work before, knew what happened when someone pushed him past his limits. The territory was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. McGrath was no longer just hunting. He was teaching a lesson written in fear and whispered in darkness about how legends don't die, they just sleep, and about what happens when someone is foolish enough to wake them. As McGrath crouched in the shadows outside the Wilson gang's camp, his hand brushed against Sarah's letter. The touch triggered memories he'd spent 5 years trying to forget. 20 years earlier, the saloon in Bitter Creek was packed when the stranger called him out. McGrath had been younger then, his reputation still growing. The stranger had been drunk, looking to make a name for himself. "You don't want this," McGrath had said quietly, not even turning from his drink. "Walk away." The stranger hadn't listened. None of them ever did. When the shooting started, McGrath's draw had been invisible to the eye, just a blur of motion followed by the thunder of his Colt. The stranger hit the floor before his own gun cleared leather. As the crowd backed away, a young woman stayed. Sarah Matthews, daughter of the town doctor. Instead of fear, her eyes held sadness. There had to be another way, she'd said. Those words would change his life forever. Present day, McGrath refocused on the camp below. Snake Eyes had posted 2 guards, but they were nervous, jumping at shadows. The legend was already doing its work. "Check the perimeter again," Snake Eyes barked. "He's out there somewhere. 15 years earlier." "You're not just killing them," Sarah had said, tending his wounds after the Clayton gang shootout. "You're killing pieces of yourself." "They're bad men," McGrath had argued. "Someone has to stop them." "There's always another bad man," she'd countered. "Will you spend your whole life killing? Is that all you want to be?" He hadn't had an answer then, but she'd seen something in him worth saving, worth changing. They were married that spring. Present day. One of Snake Eyes' men broke, making a run for the horses. McGrath let him go. The fear would spread, the story would grow, just like old times, 10 years earlier. "Promise me," Sarah had whispered, the fever burning through her. "Promise me you'll find another way to live. No more killing, no more legend, just peace." He'd promised, had kept that promise through 5 long years, through countless wrongs. He could have righted countless evil men he could have stopped. Present day. McGrath moved closer to the camp, silent as death itself. Snake Eyes was growing desperate, knowing the net was closing. The outlaw leader fired into the darkness, wasting ammunition. "Come out and face me," Snake Eyes shouted, "or are you just another story to scare children?" 5 years earlier. Day they buried Sarah, McGrath had buried his guns too, wrapped them in oilcloth and locked them away with his reputation. He'd tried to become what she wanted, just a peaceful man living a quiet life. But now, watching Snake Eyes handle his stolen gun with casual disrespect, those old wounds throbbed fresh. Some promises, no matter how sincere, couldn't survive certain violations. Present day. "Tell me something," McGrath called from the darkness, his voice carrying across the camp. "Did you ever hear why they call me Deadeye?" The remaining gang members spun, trying to locate his voice as it seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Some think it's because I never miss," he continued, moving silently to a new position. "Others say it's because my eyes are cold as a dead man's. But Sarah, she knew the truth." Snake Eyes fired again, the muzzle flash ruining his night vision. "Amateur's mistake. The truth is," McGrath's voice was closer now, a whisper in the dark. "When I look at a man, I see exactly how he's going to die. Every move he'll make, every mistake, like watching a story that's already been written." One of the gang members broke and ran. McGrath's shot cracked through the night, precise and measured. The man's gun went flying, along with any courage he had left. "That was your last chance," McGrath announced to the remaining outlaws. "Sarah would have wanted me to give you that chance. But Sarah's not here anymore. You saw to that when you treated her last words like trail trash." In the darkness, his eyes gleamed with the cold light of judgment. Old wounds were about to create new ones. The legend of Deadeye McGrath wasn't just awake, it was hungry for justice. Snake Eyes. Wilson's territory spread across 3 connected canyons, a natural fortress that had kept the gang safe from both law and rivals. Now those same high walls that had protected them for so long were becoming a trap. McGrath studied the terrain from a hidden cleft in the rocks. 3 men remained with Snake Eyes: Butch Kelly, the gang's tracker, Mexican Joe, their best shot, and Charlie Pike, a killer with more notches on his gun than sense in his head. Each one was dangerous, each one was scared. "I'm telling you, it ain't natural," Charlie's voice carried up from the camp below. "No man can shoot like that, no man can move that quiet." "Shut your mouth," Snake Eyes snarled, but even his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "He's just a man, and men can be killed." McGrath allowed himself a grim smile. He'd heard those same words before, from other men who thought themselves predators until they met something higher on nature's ladder of killers. Mexican Joe was checking his rifle for the 10th time in an hour. "I heard stories about this Deadeye McGrath," he said quietly. "They say in Sonora he once killed 4 men with 1 bullet, shot it through a window so it ricocheted and hit each one perfect." "Fairy tales," Snake Eyes spat, but his hand strayed to the stolen Colt at his hip, McGrath's gun. He'd been trying to use it, but the weapon seemed to fight him, like a wild horse that wouldn't be tamed by the wrong rider. Butch returned from checking the perimeter, his face pale beneath his weathered tan. "Tracks everywhere," he reported, "but they don't make no sense. It's like he's moving without touching the ground, and the signs, he's been inside the camp." "What?" Snake Eyes leveled the Colt at his tracker. "That's impossible. We've been watching every approach. Your coffee this morning," Butch said quietly. "It was on the wrong side of the fire. And that dead snake by your bedroll, it wasn't there when you laid down, but it was there when you woke up. He's playing with us, Snake, like a cat with mice." McGrath remembered a similar night in Apache territory, years ago. He'd learned there ghost-walking techniques, how to move without leaving signs that normal men could read. Those skills had served him well before he met Sarah. They were serving him well again. He made his move as the sun began to set, using the long shadows to his advantage. A small stone, tossed with perfect accuracy, clinked against Mexican Joe's. "Canteen!" The gang's best shot spun, firing reflexively into the shadows. The sound echoed through the canyons like thunder. "You fool!" Snake Eyes raged. "Now he knows exactly where we are." "He already knows." McGrath's voice drifted down from somewhere above them. "Just like I know Butch has been saving bullets in his left boot. Like I know Charlie's planning to run for the North Trail as soon as it's dark enough. Like I know you've been trying to use my gun, Snake Eyes, but it won't shoot straight for you." The outlaws pressed their backs together, forming a circle as they scanned the deepening shadows. McGrath's voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "That gun," he continued, "was fitted to my hand by an old gunsmith in Dodge. Man spent 3 weeks getting the balance perfect. Said it wasn't just about the weapon, it was about making it part of the shooter's soul. You feel it, don't you, Snake? How it fights you, how it knows you're not its master." Charlie broke first, making his run for the North Trail just as McGrath had predicted. A single shot rang out, and the outlaw's hat went flying, taking a lock of hair with it. Charlie didn't stop running. 3 left. McGrath's voice was closer now. "Should have listened to Tommy. Should have left me and my letter alone. Now you're in my territory." "Your territory?" Snake Eyes laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "We've held these canyons for 2 years. We know every rock, every trail. Doe. You?" McGrath's quiet response sent chills down their spines. "Then why are you standing in a crossfire position? Why is Mexican Joe's rifle pointed at the only escape route that isn't trapped? Why did Butch just step into quicksand?" The tracker's scream confirmed McGrath's words as Butch found himself suddenly sinking into what had looked like solid ground. Mexican Joe moved to help him, but Snake Eyes grabbed his arm. "Let him go," the gang leader ordered. "He's trying to separate us, make us weak." "I don't need to make you weak." McGrath's voice was just a whisper now, but they all heard it. "You did that yourself when you threw away a dead woman's last words like they were nothing. When you mocked the peace she died to give me." The sun disappeared behind the canyon walls, plunging the world into darkness. In that darkness, 3 men who had once thought themselves the most dangerous predators in the territory were about to learn what real fear felt like. They were in McGrath's territory now. And in this territory, legends didn't just walk, they hunted. Mexican Joe stood frozen in the darkness, his rifle pointed at shadows that seemed to move on their own. 20 years of gunfighting had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every instinct was screaming that they were in the presence of something beyond their understanding, I remember now, he whispered, his voice trembling. Santa Rosa, 15 years ago. I was just a boy working in my father's cantina when he came through. Snake Eyes turned, annoyed. Shut up about your stories. We need to know. Mexican Joe's voice carried an edge of desperate realization. You need to understand what we've done. The man in the cantina, he sat so quiet, so still. Then Manuel Castillo's gang came in, 12 men, all killers. They recognized him, thought they could make a name for themselves. The night air grew, colder as McGrath's voice drifted from the darkness. I remember that day, ordered a bowl of soup, never did get to finish it. Mexican Joe's hands shook on his rifle. It was like watching death itself move. Nobody saw him draw, just 12 shots, so fast they sounded like one. When it was over, every man had a bullet between the eyes, and he just sat there, looking sad about the cold soup. That was a lifetime ago. McGrath's voice came from a different direction now. Before Sarah, before peace. The priest, Mexican Joe continued, the memories flooding back. He said McGrath wasn't just a man. Said he was God's judgment made flesh. Said his eyes could see into a man's soul and measure out exactly what he deserved. Snake Eyes spat on the ground. He's playing with your head. He's just a man. Look at the tracks, Mexican Joe insisted, gesturing with his rifle. Look how they circle our camp. Perfect circles, exact distances, like a wolf marking its kill zone. My grandfather was a hunter. He said when you see signs this precise, this deliberate, you're not hunting an animal. The animal is hunting you. Single shot cracked through the night. Mexican Joe's rifle flew from his hands, the strap cut cleanly by a bullet that could have just as easily taken his head. Your grandfather was a wise man. McGrath's voice carried clear in the sudden silence. You should have listened to more of his stories. Snake Eyes raised McGrath's stolen Colt, firing wildly into the darkness. The shots went wide, the gun fighting him with every trigger pull. That day in Santa Rosa, Mexican Joe sank to his knees, crossing himself. After the shooting, McGrath left money on the table for the soup. Apologized to my father for the mess. Said he never wanted to kill those men, that they forced his hand, just like we forced his hand when we took that letter. The letter. McGrath's voice had moved again, closer now. Sarah's last words. She believed there was good in everyone, believed even someone like me could find peace. For 5 years I proved her right. The darkness seemed to deepen, and Mexican Joe felt the weight of their mistakes settling over him like a burial shroud. The stories say he retired after finding love. Said he promised her he'd never kill again. We, Madre de Dios, we didn't. Just rob an old man. We destroyed his last connection to that promise. Snake Eyes turned on him, pressing the stolen Colt to his head. One more word about these stupid stories and the gun disappeared from Snake Eyes' hand, so fast it seemed to vanish into thin air. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, and McGrath's voice came from right behind them. This gun, he said softly, hasn't taken a life since Sarah died. Part of my promise to her. But promises, like reputations, can be broken when pushed too far. Mexican Joe closed his eyes, understanding finally complete. They say Deadeye McGrath could shoot a man's gun from his hand at 50 paces, that he could put a bullet through a wedding ring at 100 yards, but those weren't the stories that scared people the most. No, McGrath's voice invited him to continue. The scary stories were about how he hunted men who truly deserved it, how he'd stalk them for days, teaching them fear before teaching them death. They say he could keep a man alive through 7 wounds, making each shot bring them closer to judgment without letting them escape it. A match flared in the darkness, illuminating McGrath's face for just a moment. He stood within arm's reach, his legendary Colt back in its rightful place. His eyes reflected the matchlight like a wolf's, ancient and merciless. 8 wounds, he corrected quietly. The 8th is always fatal. The match went out, and in the returning darkness, Mexican, Joe began to pray. Snake eyes. Wilson had never believed in ghosts, but as the night deepened in the canyon, he found himself jumping at shadows, flinching at every sound. They'd lost Butch to the quicksand, or maybe he'd just disappeared into the darkness like Charlie before him. Only Mexican Joe remained, and the man had become worse than useless, muttering prayers in Spanish and crossing himself at every noise. "He's everywhere," Mexican Joe whispered, his eyes wild in the dying firelight. "In the rocks, in the shadows, in the wind itself. We're already dead. We just don't know it yet." "Shut up!" Snake Eyes snarled, but his voice cracked. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the empty holster where McGrath's Colt had been felt, like an accusation. "He's just a man. Just an old man with some tricks." A pebble clinked against a tin cup near the fire, making both men jump. It wasn't random. It had struck with perfect precision to create the exact sound of a hammer being cocked. "Just tricks," McGrath's voice drifted down from above. "Like how I know you've got 3 bullets left in your gun, Snake Eyes, or how I know Mexican Joe's been favoring his right leg since that bank job in Tombstone went bad." Mexican Joe's face went pale. "Madre de Dios, nobody knew about that job. Nobody." "I know everything about you both," McGrath continued, his voice moving impossibly fast between locations. "Know how you started, Snake Eyes, killing your own brother for his gold claim. Know about the school teacher you shot in Carson City. Joe, know every sin, every crime, every dark deed that led you here." Snake Eyes fired blindly toward the voice, the sound explosive in the confined canyon. The echo hadn't died before McGrath's answering shot knocked the gun from his hand with surgical precision. 2 bullets left, McGrath counted calmly. 1 in Joe's rifle, 1 in the derringer you think I don't know about in your boot. Not enough, not nearly enough. Mexican Joe broke, throwing down his rifle and making a run for the canyon's east exit. A shot cracked out, and he stumbled, crying out as the bullet grazed his shoulder, exactly deep enough to wound, not deep enough to kill. 7, McGrath's voice carried clearly. 7 wounds left before the 8th. Sarah taught me patience, taught me that some lessons need time to sink in. Snake Eyes watched his last ally stumble back to the firelight, blood seeping through his shirt. "You're enjoying this," he accused the darkness, "playing with us like a cat with mice." "No." McGrath's response was soft, sad. "I never enjoyed killing. Sarah helped me see that about myself, but some debts have to be paid, some lessons have to be taught. That letter you treated like trash. It was her last gift to me, her last attempt to save my soul." A wind gusted through the canyon, scattering embers from their fire. In the swirling sparks, Snake Eyes caught glimpses of movement, or thought he did. McGrath seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, a ghost made of shadow and judgment. "Remember the stories now," Mexican Joe moaned. "They say he could shoot so fast. The eye couldn't follow. Say he killed the entire Martinez gang while drinking a cup of coffee, never spilled a drop. But those weren't the worst stories." "The worst stories," McGrath's voice finished, "were about what happened when someone made it personal. When they crossed the line between business and vengeance. Ask him about it, Joe. Ask your boss about the letter." Snake Eyes felt the weight of his last remaining gun, the derringer in his boot. 1 bullet, 1 chance, if he could just figure out where McGrath was. "You want to know something interesting about fear?" McGrath asked conversationally. "Sarah studied it. Said fear does strange things to a man's mind. Makes him see things that aren't there, makes him miss things that are." As if to demonstrate, another shot rang out. Mexican Joe screamed as a bullet creased his other shoulder, a mirror image of the first wound. 6, McGrath counted. Plenty of time left to think about choices, about consequences, about the true price of treating a dying woman's last words like they were nothing. In the darkness beyond the firelight, a legend was teaching them why some lines should never be crossed. Why some debts could only be paid in blood and fear, and the night was still young. Snake Eyes Wilson had spent 15 years outthinking lawmen and rival gangs. Now, watching Mexican Joe tend his precisely matched wounds, a desperate plan formed in his mind. "He's trying to spook us," Snake Eyes whispered. "Using the darkness, the stories, playing mind games, but I know these canyons, know something he doesn't." Mexican Joe looked up, pain and fear etched on his face. "Nothing to know, nothing to plan. He's got us marked for shut up and listen," Snake Eyes hissed. "The old mining tunnels, they run under the whole canyon system. We can circle behind him, come up where he won't expect us." A soft chuckle drifted down from the darkness. "The tunnels collapsed last spring," McGrath's voice carried clearly. "Or didn't you wonder why the Martinez gang stopped using them?" Snake Eyes smiled for the first time since darkness fell. McGrath had taken the bait, revealing he didn't know everything. The tunnels had been cleared just last month. The gang had used them 3 days ago. "Stay here," he ordered Mexican Joe. "Keep him talking, make him think we're both still by the fire." Joe grabbed his arm. "No, you don't understand. This is exactly what he—" But Snake Eyes was already moving, slipping, away into the shadows. He knew a secret entrance behind the western ridge. 10 minutes through the tunnels would put him right above McGrath's suspected position. The tunnel entrance was exactly where he remembered, hidden behind a fall of loose rock. Snake Eyes drew his derringer. 1 bullet, but at close range. That's all he'd need. The legendary Deadeye McGrath wouldn't be so deadly with a bullet in his back. The tunnel was pitch black, but Snake Eyes knew every turn. He moved quickly, confidently, counting steps to mark his progress. 8 minutes in, he allowed himself a grim smile. McGrath might be a legend with a gun, but he was still just a man. Still had to watch the obvious approaches, the sight lines. His foot hit something that clinked softly. A match flared in front of him, held in McGrath's steady hand. The flickering light revealed dozens of empty tin cans arranged precisely across the tunnel floor. An early warning system that had worked perfectly. "Interesting thing about these old mines," McGrath said conversationally, his face ghostly in the matchlight. "Sound carries strangely through them. A man can hear every plan being made up above, clear as day." Snake Eyes raised his derringer, but McGrath's gun seemed to materialize from nowhere, already aimed. "That collapse I mentioned?" McGrath continued. "I caused it about 2 hours ago, shaped charges in just the right places, sealed off every exit except the one that led you right here." The match went out, plunging them into total darkness. Snake Eyes fired blindly, the derringer's report deafening in the confined space. The muzzle flash revealed an empty tunnel ahead of him. "Missed." McGrath's voice came from behind him now. "Just like you missed the signs. Missed how I've been, herding you here since sundown. Missed why I let you think you had a clever plan." A single shot rang out. Snake Eyes screamed as the bullet found his shoulder, a wound that exactly matched Mexican Joe's first injury. 5 wounds left, McGrath counted calmly. Plenty of time to think about that letter, about Sarah's last words, about choices and consequences. Snake Eyes turned to run, but in the pitch blackness he had lost all sense of direction. Every tunnel felt the same, every turn led nowhere. He was trapped in a maze of his own making, being hunted by a ghost who could see in the dark. "I spent 3 days preparing these tunnels," McGrath's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "While you were celebrating an easy robbery, I was turning your escape route into your prison. That's what Sarah never understood about me. It was never about the speed or the shooting." Another shot cracked out. Snake Eyes' other shoulder erupted. In matching pain. 4 wounds remaining, McGrath counted. It was about the planning, the patience, the absolute certainty that when the moment came, every piece would be in exactly the right place. In the darkness of the tunnel system, Snake Eyes finally understood. They hadn't sprung a trap on McGrath. They had been walking into his trap since the moment they robbed him. Every choice, every decision, every desperate plan had been anticipated and turned against them, and the night was far from over. Snake Eyes stumbled through the darkness of the mine tunnels, both shoulders burning from perfectly matched wounds. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the knowledge that each shot had been precisely placed, that each matching injury was part of a methodical plan. You know what the worst part is? McGrath's voice echoed through the tunnels. I almost made it. 5 years of peace, 5 years of keeping Sarah's dream alive. Then you had to steal that letter. A match flared 30 feet ahead, illuminating McGrath's face. Gone was any pretense of the tired old drifter. His eyes reflected the matchlight like a wolf's, and his legendary Colt seemed to gather the darkness around it. Stay back, Snake Eyes shouted, retreating from the light. You're supposed to be retired. You're supposed to be done with killing. I was. The match went out, but McGrath's voice carried clearly. But some things are worth breaking promises for. Some debts can only be paid one way. Above ground, Mexican Joe heard Snake Eyes' desperate shouts echoing up through hidden tunnel entrances. The sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the entire canyon was alive with his leader's terror. You want to know something interesting about legends? McGrath appeared at the edge of Joe's firelight, moving like a shadow given form. They're not just stories. They're warnings, lessons written in blood about lines that shouldn't be crossed. Mexican Joe raised his hands, wincing at the matching wounds in his shoulders. Please, we didn't know about the letter, about who you were. No, McGrath agreed, his voice soft but carrying an edge like a razor. You didn't know. You saw an old man, alone on the trail. Thought he'd be an easy mark. Never stopped to think that there might be a reason he was allowed to travel alone in outlaw territory. A scream echoed from the tunnels, Snake Eyes finding another dead end, another carefully laid trap. McGrath didn't even turn his head, as if he knew exactly where his quarry was at all times. The stories they tell about me, McGrath continued, checking his Colt with practiced ease, most of them are exaggerated. I can't shoot around corners, can't kill a man with just a thought, can't vanish into thin air. He smiled, and it was the smile of winter itself. But some stories don't tell half of what I can do. As if to demonstrate, he fired without looking. The bullet screamed through a gap in the rocks, ricocheted twice, and found Snake Eyes in the darkness of the tunnels. A cry of pain confirmed another matching wound. 3 left, McGrath counted calmly. You know the interesting thing about match sets? Sarah taught me that. She collected china teacups, always in pairs, said there was something satisfying about perfect symmetry. Mexican Joe watched in terror as McGrath seemed to fade into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. His voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I've tried to forget what I was, tried to become something else, but you had to push, had to take the one thing that kept the old me buried. Now everybody gets to remember why they used to whisper my name around campfires. The night air grew colder as McGrath's true nature emerged fully. No longer the peaceful drifter, no longer bound by promises of non-violence. Here, in the darkness of his chosen killing ground, he was what he had always been, a force of nature wrapped in human form. Last chance, McGrath called out to the night. Throw down your guns, walk away. Sarah would want me to give you that choice. Snake Eyes' voice carried up from the tunnels, cracked with pain and fear. Why? Why drag it out like this? If you're going to kill us, just do it. McGrath's response chilled the blood of both outlaws, because Sarah's letter deserved respect, because her last words were about finding peace, about being better than what we are. So I'm giving you time to think about that, time to understand exactly why some lines shouldn't be crossed. A shot rang out, echoing through canyon and tunnel. Two cries of pain merged into one as both men received matching wounds in their left legs. 2 wounds remaining, McGrath counted. Then comes the 8th, the one that finishes our business. The legend of Deadeye McGrath wasn't just awake now. It was fully revealed, terrible in its precision, awesome in its completeness. In the darkness of a canyon that had become his killing ground, a myth was teaching outlaws why some legends are born from truth and why some truths are darker than any legend. Dawn was approaching, the first grey light seeping into the canyon like smoke over water. McGrath stood in plain sight now, no longer moving through shadows. His duster hung open, the legendary Colt at his hip gleaming dully in the pre-dawn light. Time. "To end this," he called out, his voice carrying across the canyon and down into the mine tunnels. "No more games, no more lessons, just you, me, and the consequences of your choices." Snake Eyes peered out from his tunnel hiding place, seeing McGrath silhouetted against the lightening sky. A clear shot, maybe his last chance, but his hands shook too badly to risk it. "You want to know something about reputation," McGrath continued, not even bothering to look toward the tunnel entrance. "It's not about how fast you are, not about how many men you've killed. It's about the way you do things, the message you send." Mexican Joe sat slumped by the dying fire, his matched wounds making every movement agony. "Just kill us," he pleaded. "End it clean." "Clean?" McGrath's voice carried an edge of cold amusement. "Like how you treated Sarah's letter? Like how you mocked a dying woman's last words?" He drew his Colt with that legendary speed, just a blur of motion, too fast for the eye to follow. 2 shots rang out as one, and both men cried out as matching wounds appeared in their right legs. 1 wound left, McGrath counted, before the 8th, the one that finishes our business. Snake Eyes finally broke, screaming from his tunnel. "What do you want from us?" "Want?" McGrath's response was soft, but carried clearly. "I want you to understand. I want everyone who hears about this night to understand. Some things are sacred. Some lines can't be uncrossed." He reached into his shirt pocket, drawing out Sarah's crumpled letter. "My wife spent her last moments writing this, trying to save not just my life, but my soul. She believed even someone like me could find peace." The letter caught the first rays of sunrise, the paper glowing golden in the early light. 5 years, I kept my promise to her. 5 years of walking away from fights. 5 years of trying to be the man she thought I could be. His voice hardened. "Then you came along, thought you'd rob an old man, thought you'd mock the last words of a dying woman, thought there wouldn't be consequences." McGrath holstered his Colt with deliberate slowness. "Well, now you know better. Now everyone will know better. The next time some hard case thinks about robbing an old drifter, they'll remember this night. Remember what happened to the Wilson gang." He turned in a slow circle, his voice reaching every corner of the canyon. "So come on out, face what's coming, die like men instead of rabbits hiding in holes." Snake Eyes looked to the lightening sky, then down at his matching wounds. Every injury was precise, deliberate, a signature as clear as any name. "He's not just going to kill us," he realized aloud. "He's making us into a message." "Last chance," McGrath called out. "You can die here in the dark or out there in the light. But one way or another, this ends now. No more hiding, no more games." The sun crested the canyon rim, spilling golden light across the killing ground McGrath had prepared so carefully. In that light, he stood transformed, no longer the peaceful drifter, no longer bound by promises of gentler ways. Here was the legend in full, terrible glory, come to collect a debt that could only be paid in blood. "Time to settle accounts," McGrath announced, his hand resting easily on his Colt. "Time to remind everyone why they used to whisper my name in the dark." The legend of Deadeye McGrath was no longer just a story to frighten children. It was alive, vengeful, and demanding satisfaction. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon floor as McGrath stood waiting, Sarah's letter held carefully in his left hand. His right stayed close to the Colt, but didn't touch it. Not yet. "I'm going to read something," he announced, his voice carrying to every hiding place in the canyon. "Sarah's last words, the ones you thought were worthless. Then we'll finish this, one way or another." Mexican Joe tried to stand but fell back, his matching wounds making movement nearly impossible. Snake Eyes remained in his tunnel, watching, through a crack in the rocks, as McGrath unfolded the weathered paper. "My dearest James," McGrath began reading, his voice softer now, but still carrying clearly. "As I write this, I know my time is short. The fever's getting worse. But I need you to understand something before I go." He paused, letting the words hang in the morning air. "You've lived your life by the gun, becoming a legend that mothers use to frighten their children. But I've seen something else in you, something better." Snake Eyes shifted position, trying to get a clear shot. His movement displaced some loose rocks, but McGrath didn't even glance his way. "Promise me you'll find another way to live." McGrath continued reading. "Not for me, but for yourself. There's been enough killing, enough death. You can be more than just a legend to fear. You can be a man at peace." His voice hardened. 5 years I kept that promise. 5 years of walking away from fights. 5 years of being something other than what I am. Then you had to take this letter. Had to mock these words. The paper crackled as he carefully refolded it. "I'm giving you one last chance. Not because you deserve it, but because Sarah would want me to. Throw down your guns. Walk away. Live with your matched wounds as a reminder of why some things should be respected." Snake Eyes' laugh echoed hollowly from the tunnel. "And trust you to let us live? Everyone knows Deadeye McGrath never leaves witnesses." "That was before Sarah," McGrath replied quietly, "before she taught me about mercy, before she made me promise to find another way." He paused, his voice growing colder. "But that promise died when you threw her last words in the dirt. Now you get to choose, surrender and live with your scars, or die making her point for me." Mexican Joe looked up from his position by the dead fire. How do we know we can trust you?" "You don't," McGrath answered simply. "Just like I didn't know if I could change, if I could keep Sarah's promise. Sometimes you have to take a chance on mercy. Sometimes it's your only hope." The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows. McGrath stood patient, implacable, giving them time to choose their fate. In one hand he held Sarah's letter, an offer of mercy, a chance at redemption. His other hand stayed near his Colt, justice waiting to be delivered. "1 minute," he announced. "Decide now. Live with your scars or die making my point. But understand this. Either way, everyone will hear about what happened here. Everyone will know why it happened. And everyone will think twice before disrespecting a dead woman's last words." The canyon held its breath, waiting for their choice. In this moment, suspended between violence and mercy, between past and future, a legend offered a last chance at salvation, but legends, once woken, are hard to put back to sleep. The minute passed in absolute silence. McGrath stood motionless in the morning sun, his shadow stretching across the canyon floor like the hand of judgment itself. The only movement was Sarah's letter, fluttering gently in his grip. Snake Eyes made his choice first. He erupted from the tunnel entrance, gun blazing, trying to catch McGrath by surprise. It was a good plan, would have worked against most men, but McGrath wasn't most men. The legendary Colt seemed to materialize in his hand. One shot rang out, so precise it split Snake Eyes' bullet in midair, sending both halves harmlessly into the dirt. The second shot knocked the gun from the outlaw's hand with surgical precision. 7 wounds matched, McGrath counted calmly. Time for the 8th. Mexican Joe chose that moment to make his move, drawing a hidden derringer from his boot. But McGrath had known about that too, just as he'd known about every weapon, every plan, every desperate gambit they might try. What happened next would be talked about in saloons for decades to come. McGrath's gun seemed to disappear and reappear. As he fired, each shot precise as a surgeon's scalpel. The derringer flew from Joe's hand. Snake Eye's attempt to draw another hidden gun was stopped before it began. Both men found themselves disarmed so fast it looked like magic. "You know what Sarah never understood about me?" McGrath's voice carried clearly in the aftermath of the gunshots. "She thought the killing bothered me. But it wasn't the killing. It was the waste, the pointless death of men too stupid to know when they were beaten." He moved with that legendary speed, his Colt tracking both men. "You had your chance at mercy, had your chance to walk away. Now you get to be part of the lesson, part of the story they'll tell around campfires. The story of what happens when you wake a sleeping legend." Snake Eyes tried to sneer, but fear made his voice shake. "No," McGrath replied softly. "The story of why some things deserve respect, why some lines shouldn't be crossed, why a dying woman's last words are worth more than your lives." His gun barked twice more, so fast the shots merged into one. Both men cried out as bullets found their right hands, the 8th matching wound. But these weren't fatal. These were just signatures, marking them forever as men who had crossed the wrong line. "You'll live," McGrath announced, holstering his gun with fluid grace. "Live to tell the story. Live to be walking reminders of why some legends don't fade, they just sleep. Live to make sure nobody ever forgets what happens when you disrespect a dead woman's last request." He walked between them as they clutched their wounded hands, his presence more powerful than any threat. "Every time someone sees those scars, they'll ask about them. And you'll tell them about the night you robbed an old drifter, about how you mocked his dead wife's letter, about how Deadeye McGrath taught you the meaning of respect." Snake Eyes looked up, blood seeping between his fingers. "Why? Why not? Just kill us." McGrath held up Sarah's letter, now carefully refolded and unmarked by the violence around it. "Because Sarah was right. There's been enough death, but there's never enough lessons." He tucked the letter carefully away. "You'll be my lesson, my message to anyone else who thinks legends are just stories." The sun climbed higher as McGrath turned to leave, his shadow falling across both wounded men. 8 matched wounds," he said quietly. "Perfect symmetry. Sarah would have appreciated that, at least." Behind him, he left not just 2 broken men, but a story that would spread across the territory. A story about respect, about consequences, about lines that shouldn't be crossed, and about how some legends never truly retire. They just wait for a reason to wake up. Word spread fast across the territory. In saloons and trading posts, around campfires and dinner tables, people talked about what had happened in that canyon, about how the Wilson gang had robbed an old drifter, not knowing they were waking Deadeye. McGrath, from his 5 years of peace, they spoke of the matched wounds, 8 perfectly paired injuries that would mark Snake Eyes Wilson and Mexican Joe for life. Some said it was impossible for a man to shoot that precisely. Others just nodded, knowing that with McGrath, impossible was just another word for legendary. A month after that night, McGrath stood at Sarah's grave, her letter carefully returned to its oiled wrapping. "Had to break my promise," he said quietly to the stone. "Had to become what I was again. But maybe you'd understand. Maybe you'd see that sometimes the old ways are needed to protect the new." The territory had changed. Word was that 3 separate gangs had moved on after hearing what happened to the Wilson gang. Riders learned to give lone drifters a wide berth, especially ones with quiet eyes and well-maintained guns. Snake Eyes and Mexican Joe were seen sometimes, their matching scars drawing stares and whispers. They told their story to anyone who asked, told it straight and true, knowing that somewhere out there McGrath would hear if they didn't. Told about how they'd learned respect for dead women's letters and about why some legends are better left sleeping. McGrath rode on, back to his wandering ways. But he was different now. Not quite the peaceful man he'd been, not quite the cold legend either. He carried Sarah's letter close to his heart, a reminder of both peace and consequence. Some said he'd fallen back into his killing ways. Those who looked closer knew better. He'd found a balance between what Sarah wanted him to be and what he needed to be. A legend who offered mercy first, but never forgot how to deliver justice. And in the quiet places of the territory, mothers still whispered his name to frighten children, not just as a warning against bad behavior now, but as a lesson about respect, about how some things are sacred, about how some lines once crossed can only be uncrossed with blood and pain. Deadeye McGrath rode on, into legend once again. But this time, he carried something more than just his reputation. He carried Sarah's last words, and the wisdom to know when peace needed the protection of violence. The territory was better for it.